Latif. How you doing?
So I don't know.
All right. All right. It's good to see y'all. It's wonderful. It's good to be here. The world is full of trouble today, but the biggest trouble for us right now in terms of our community right here at the Molefi Kete Asante Institute is the loss of Brother Rob Dickerson. We dedicate this day to him. Rob Dickerson was perhaps one of the sharpest and keenest and most successful purveyors of African culture we've ever had in this city. And that goes all the way back to all of the great artists that we have had here in Philadelphia, all of the great musicians and dancers and choreographers. Rob Dickerson took African culture to his heart. And he's been here many times in this building, and in fact has performed in this space. His group, Universal Drum and Dance Ensemble, has actually become the source of power for a lot of African people in Philadelphia. And I know he was a close friend to a lot of us, Brother Carlton, Brother Stan. Rob Dickerson was a unique individual. And his legacy will live on because we will ensure that his legacy live on. People are born in anonymity, but they live forever if we remember them and we know what they taught us, and we keep telling our children who these people were. Rob Dickerson is unique in every way, and he did so many good things for this city and for our young people. His children mastered African dance and African culture. In fact, they went to Senegal, I remember, and the Senegalese said, well, it's like these people have never left Senegal. They were so good, they were brilliant. And we will support Sister Wanda and the Universal Drum and Dance Ensemble for as long as we can. Just want to also let you know that Brother Mangalisa and Sister Joyce are not here because Sister Joyce's car was broken into earlier today, but they're resolving that issue. And I just also want to point out that we are still facing in the society, in the world, raging brutality of racism and anti-blackness, just as we have seen the struggle, of course, in Southwest Asia with the Palestinians and the Israelis, and that struggle has a long history. It's longer than any of us in terms of our lifetimes. I mean, it goes all the way back to the 7th century, actually. So it's a long struggle, and it is one that has seen so much bloodshed on both sides and so much oppression. And so it's extremely important that we, as Africologists and Afrocentric people, learn to do critical analysis of all issues. And we certainly have to always side with nonviolence and with peace, because Maat, which is the central theme of my talk today, is key, and that is, in my judgment, one of the basic ways that we respond to issues. It's difficult, of course. I mean, I'm not trying to gloss over all the difficulties that exist in society and say that you can always have peace, but peace should always be the objective, and that should be our drive. Our aim should always be peace and always bringing harmony and order and balance and truth and righteousness and justice in the world. And if we can't bring truth and justice and righteousness to the world, then who can do it? African people are the most qualified to do that. We have not most qualified because of some natural gift, but most qualified because of the historical experiences of our people. That's why it is. So I don't want to indicate that there is some special quality except the quality that our experiences have been so uniquely defined by what we have had to overcome that it makes it different for how we approach issues. And I think that that's the key. I mean, I was looking earlier today, and this is just an aside, and I'm going to get right to my talk. It is not going to be long, but this was an aside. I looked at three people on a news program. One was a rabbi, one was an imam, and one was a Christian pastor. And the Christian pastor was a black woman. And they talked a lot about the situation in Palestine and Israel. And then finally, a rabbi makes a statement. And the rabbi says, according to one of our prophets, such and such happened, and such is the case. And the imam could also relate his thing to a culture. But the pastor, the Christian pastor, who was this black woman, had no reference to her culture. And I felt like I've seen this picture before. I saw it once on national television where one of our outstanding journalists was having a conversation. And one of the people made the same sort of reference that according to our prophets. And I said, I wish that brother, and in this case, that sister, knew their own history. Because if they knew their own history, if they had a reference point, even if they didn't know everything, they could say, well, in the Odu Ifa, such and such is said. In the Odu Ifa, we recognize, that Iwa Pele is a great value in human history and human society, to have good character and fine character and pure character and cool character. That's when you have a reference point where you can stand somewhere. But when you can't stand anywhere, you can only stand in the land and on the territory of other people. That's the sadness of the African American historical experience. Not that we don't have a history, we have a glorious history. Not that we don't have experiences. Our experiences come in all forms, and we have been experienced as people everywhere. But sometimes we don't teach our experiences to our children, and we don't know. So I'm going to just talk a little bit today about African American history, fighting for an advance in Maat. And I want to give let me say this is an introduction. Those of you who know about African American history, it is so monumental that it would take me many hours and many days to talk about African American history. But I'm going to just give you just some key facts today. I want to talk a little bit about the experiences of African people, and then talk a little bit about how we responded to what we saw in our condition, and then talk a little bit about some of the achievements. And then I will be finished for today. I'll hold off, and we'll have, like they do on Netflix, we'll have series of discussions about this. You can tune in the next time, all right, about these things. One of the things that is very great about us is that in this country, and it's not before, by the way, this is a very important point. It was not before the enslavement, but it was during the enslavement, which was a cauldron of incredible activities and ideas, but ideas that were never possible to express in writing. You know, we didn't, it was against the law to teach us to read or write, and few of us did. And so only those who were free could read and learn to write. Very few people who were enslaved, who came from my part of the African, I call it my peoples, you know. People come from, we didn't learn how to read or write. If we learned, we would often be punished. So it was not, so reading and writing was not a part of the African experience for decades, you see, on and on. This was a condition. So we had all these experiences. We collected all this drama. We collected all of these stories. And sometimes we could sing. And one of the songs we said was, I got my religion from out of the sun. And I always ask myself the question, did the African ancestors in this country somehow understand something that perhaps we've forgotten? That the idea of the sun as being at the core of the religious experience of humanity was also at the core of their experience. This is what, you go back, as far back as you go, people talk about the sun. And they talk about the sun because the sun represented so many things. This is why even in ancient Kemet, the sun is very, very powerful. And in fact, there are several times when deities were given the same image as the sun or were represented by the sun. For example, Ra was represented by the sun. In fact, the way the ancient Kemetic people represented Ra was to draw a circle and put a dot in the center of it. They say that's Ra, that represents Ra because of the greatness. We look at the sun and we see how great the sun is. And the sun covers everything. And the sun doesn't make any discrimination on people. The sun shines on the rich as well as on the poor. The sun shines on the one who has a boat and the one who is boatless. It doesn't matter. The sun shines everywhere, you see. So this was a great image. And at one point in Kemet's history, Akhenaten made the statement that Atan was really the great representative of the sun, that the sun represented Atan. So the sun, this idea we got our religion out of the sun, is letting me know that the African people in America understood that we had an African origin, that it was fundamental. And sometimes, you know, we get confused and think that we just grew up here in America and that we did not come from other places, but we in fact came here from the continent of Africa. And it was called the transatlantic journey, but that's not a good name to call it. It was actually a European slave trade. It's not the African slave trade, so don't let people tell you it was the African slave trade. Africans didn't have anything to do with this. There may have been Africans who were collaborators from time to time, but in effect, this was a European slave trade. And the Atlantic Ocean didn't have anything to do with our enslavement, except it was just the passage, you see. And it was a monstrous project of moving people. And it started with the Portuguese, the Swedes, the Danish, the English, the Scots, the French, the Germans, and the Dutch, and you can go on and on. Almost every European in Western Europe had something to do with the Spanish, for example, had something to do with the enslavement of African people. The going to the African continent and getting African people and enslaving them in the Americas. In fact, it was one of the greatest transfers of wealth in the history of the world, because that's basically what this was about. It was a transferring of wealth. Otherwise, Europe would be one of the poorest regions in the world. But because of the enslavement of Africans and the transfer of labor from Africa to the Americas to help fuel the economies of Europe, then we began to see this incredible brutality against black people. In fact, people said that if it were not for Haiti, France would have been a poor nation, because they basically destroyed Haiti. And it was at one time the richest colony. Can you imagine that? It was the richest colony in the world, Haiti. It produced more wealth and gave more power to the French government than any other colony. It was the model colony as far as Europe was concerned. And yet, if you talk about it today, you're talking about a country that is essentially destroyed. The African world included many people. Over 300 different ethnic groups were brought to this country, including the Wolof and the Akan and the Congo and the Igbo and the Yoruba and the Baule, the Hausa, the Mandinka, the Serer, the Puel. Over 300 groups of people. Many of them do not exist anymore. In fact, there are songs that we will never hear. There are languages that will never be spoken, because those groups of Africans were so small in numbers that all of their people were engulfed in the slave trade. And when all of their people were finally gone, their languages were gone. Their customs were gone. Their rituals were gone. We don't even know what these people would have contributed to the world. They're wiped out through the slave trade, you see. This is the history of it. But then we had another song. We say, I don't care where you bury my body, because the middle passage was a hellish journey. Humans crowded into ships, sometimes 800 to 1,000 people crowded in the holds of ships, you see. And sometimes we only had, they said, about 12 inches of space between us and the layers of people laying flat on their backs above us. And the squalor was terrible. The pain and the agony was horrible. And the way people experienced that enslavement and the middle passage they thought was the worst, because sometimes it could even take 2 months to cross the ocean. And other times you can cross the ocean faster depending on the wind and the currents. But it was a horrible journey for African people. And it was out of that experience, as well as the cauldron of the enslavement, that we began to form what became the culture that we would have. And we had this culture coming from all these different groups. We all spoke different languages. I mean, the Wolof, when you speak to a Wolof, you say Nagadef. That's not the same as when you speak to an Akan. You say Wohotosen. You're speaking to an Akan. You speak in Asante or Fanti language, you see. That's different from Nagadef, you see. That's different from Shalafini, which is the Yoruba. It's different from that. All these languages. So you got 300 different languages. You got all these people with all these languages coming together and being crowded in ships. Sometimes different ethnic groups side by side who don't know each other's language, different customs and so on. This was the greatest transfer of labor, the greatest transfer of knowledge, and the greatest transfer. Remember, it was the transfer of wisdom as well. Not just a transfer of labor. Sometimes we think of the enslavement as they just took Africans from the continent, brought us over to the Americas, and we became free labor. No, they not only do it, they had our knowledge. They learned how to plant rice. They don't plant rice in Europe. They learned that from the Africans. They learned how to do indigo. They learned these things from the Africans. They learned how to do gold mining, because gold mining had been for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years in Ghana and West Africa. People have been mining gold. So there were all kinds of things that had to be learned, and we had to have these experiences. So this was the transfer of knowledge, of wealth, and wisdom. And then, of course, we had a song said, "Dark clouds are rising." And what we meant by that was that there was going to be resistance to enslavement, and there was. The fall of Ghana, the fall of Mali, and the fall of Shanghai left Western Europe, Western Africa open for invasion. There were no longer any central defenses, no longer any places that would, or any armies that could defend the African homeland. With the death, for example, of Sonny Alibert in 1491, a year before Columbus comes to the Americas, you have one of the great kings gone. And now the openness of West Africa for the Portuguese is right there. It comes right out. The arrival of the Portuguese in the Senegal River in 1444 produced the first Africans that were enslaved. This was 70 people were taken in a village along the Senegal River and taken to Lisbon. And that was the beginning of a process that would go on until the beginning of the 20th century. That was the process, you see, that began the process of the enslavement. So this is one of the things that we need to understand. And then we used to have a song saying, "The other world is not like this." That there must be another world, because this world is crazy. The other world is not like this. And let me just tell you what I'm thinking about when I wrote this. In 1619, the first Africans arrived at Point Comfort in Virginia, outside Jamestown. And in 1865, slavery ended in the United States legally, by law. That was 246 years. And I always like to make this point because people forget it. So from 1866 to 2023 is only 157 years, which means that we were enslaved much longer than we have been free. Think about that. That our ancestors were enslaved 246 years. They never knew, they never could dream that there would be an end to it. They knew they would have to struggle and fight all the time. They didn't see an end. You couldn't predict an end. 157 years from that time. So that's why when people talk to me about African American people, I say, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea what we have done and what we have achieved in 157 years. And you have no idea what the odds were against the Africans who fought to gain those experiences. In our families, we have all these stories. There are millions of stories in the African American family that have never been told. And these are stories that are beginning to be told, and I like the fact that they are. People are telling individual stories. People are writing their memoirs. They're writing memoirs of their families. They're talking about what happened. And this is the age of the voice of the African American speaking out on these issues. So I hope that we take the next 50 years to just begin to tell the story, that the world will know that here are the people who brought wisdom, who brought we actually brought freedom. I'll explain that in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. We had another song that said, "Swing low, sweet chariot." And we understood that nothing could keep Africans down in the dumps because we found a way out of no way. That's what people say. Well, you got to find a way out of no way. We didn't know what they meant when the old people said that, because sometimes we would want to dwell on what we couldn't do. He said, no, don't dwell on what you can't do. Dwell on what is possible, what you can do. And this is the way I taught my children. Don't tell me what you can't do. You tell me what is possible. And if it's possible, if other people can do it, you can do it. If they have done it, you can do it, you see? So this is the key. Margaret Walker wrote the woman who wrote the book Jubilee, wrote a great poem, For My People, which is one of the great testaments of how African people responded to life in America. For my people, the ones who always planting and who always harvesting, you see, and washing clothes and taking care of the world. In fact, we built the Capitol building. We built it. We built the White House. We were the one, our labor was the one that helped to lay out the streets of Washington, D.C. And these are stories that have been erased from history. We have to bring them back to history. And so let me just change here for a minute. And I want to change and go to some very real stories. We didn't write, for the most part, for that 246 years, because it was illegal. And some of us did write, the ones who lived in the North, some parts of the North. But people wrote for us. And you know who wrote for us? Our enslavers. Listen to, I'm going to read a series of these, and I don't have titles on all of them, a series of what I call runaway slave ads. Because one of the things that we did to escape slavery was we ran away. We resisted, you see. A Negro boy named Stephen, he is brisk. Listen to what they're writing. They wrote in the newspaper. He is brisk, sensible lad, about 16, is very artful and cunning, has been much whipped, which his back will show, and has several scars in his face. He stole, when he went away, sundry clothes and about 3 pounds cash. He was seen on the 12th instant in King Williams County on a gray horse and was going towards Matomini River. But being met by one of his acquaintance, he may perhaps change his course from the northward to the southward for fear of discovery. This is somebody who lost an African. That's what he wrote about him. So here's what do I know about him. So here's how I know about Stephen. Stephen was smart. He was intelligent. He was clever. He knew enough that he didn't want to be whipped anymore. He was much whipped. This was the white guy's writing. He's much whipped. You can't do that to me and expect me to stay there. I'm one of those people. I'm like Stephen. I'm out of here, brother. You're not gonna do that. You see, there were tens of thousands of Africans who did just like Stephen. That's the message they don't want you to know. But you know how you can know it? Just go Google runaway slave ads for any county, any state, any era, any 100 years. And there you go. You see what Africans did. You may not be able to read this one, but a fortnight ago, a Negro woman about 21 years of age. She is tall and black, very lusty, and supposed to be pretty, far gone with child. Her dress cannot be well described, having several changes of apparel, and generally wears a blue cloth cloak. At the same time, went away and indented servant man named James Bruce, a seaman from Scotland, about 5 feet 7 or 8 inches high, 25 years of age, and wears his own dark colored hair. Whoever brings the Negro woman to me shall have 40 shillings and be allowed all expenses. And as it is supposed the servant man carried her away, whoever apprehends him with the woman shall have 10 pounds on his conviction. All masters of vessels are hereby forbid to carry either of them out of the colony. Here's a white guy ran away with a black woman. Now we know this from the ad. This is what the people are saying. This person from Scotland was a servant, and now he is part of this situation. Listen to this. The said Dick is well set, artful, and cunning fellow. They always like cunning. Black people, just because you want to escape from bondage doesn't mean that cunning carries maybe a negative thing. No, just say he's very intelligent. Somebody want to get out of bondage. About 40 years of age, 5 feet 7 or 8 inches high, broad shoulders, large hips, a small waist, bow legs, and flat feet. His teeth very open before, has some gray hairs in his head and beard, and several scars on his head. He understands going by water, shoemaking, carpenter's work, and sewing. So he is a talented person. He has skills in carpentry. He also has skills with the water, with the sea. And he is a shoemaker. Again, not somebody who doesn't have talent, but somebody who has knowledge and talent enough and who is courageous enough to say, I'm out of here. I'm not going to stand for this. And then in September 15, 1752, named Jack, an old of a very black complexion, broad face, very broad teeth, of a very agreeable countenance, and when he smiles has dimples in each cheek. His hair trimmed to a roll and by frequent combing has grown to a prodigious length. His feet are remarkably large and has by accident had a small piece taken out of one ear, but which I cannot recollect. He is a very ingenious fellow, this one, right? Can do cooper's work. They make wooden barrels, you see, and is supposed to have a pass from some villainous person or other, and will endeavor to pass as a free man. And as he is sensible, arch fellow, probably he will attempt to make his escape from off this continent. He's not just going to another county or to another colony or state. He's going to get out of the continent. I want to go home to Africa. What is all this stuff about these guys just escaping? And then Patty, about 18 years old, and she escaped with about 6 or 7 other people, but I just I copied the part about her. She was 18 years old, 5 feet high, has a scar upon one of her arms below the elbow. And all these people have scars. Either they've been beaten or whipped or kicked or brutalized in one way. And sundry others on her breast, which appear like burns. And her back appears to have been used to the whip. She has a child with her, about 2 years old. So this is a woman escaping with her baby. She's not, I'm out of here, I'm taking my child. It is suspected they have forged passes and may endeavor to pass for Mr. Hunters or for free Negroes. All masters of vessels and others are hereby forbid to carry off or harbor the said slaves under the penalty of the law. Whoever takes up the said Negroes and brings them to the subscriber shall have the above reward, or for Harry $10, or either of the other $4. And if taken 50 miles from home or out of the state, all necessary charges will be paid by Basil Noah, June 2nd, 1788. So you can see, just 1 or 2 more and then I'll be finished with this. 1768, a new Negro fellow. A likely new Negro fellow of the Mandingo, meaning Mandinka or Mandingo. Mandingo country, West Africa. About 5 feet 7, appears to be about 25 years of age, as he was only landed in the country 3 days before he left, before his elopement. He could therefore have no particular route to prosecute. He didn't know where he was going, nor can he speak English sufficient to give any account of himself. He just left. See, I'm out of here. I'm gone. So all over this country, there were black people like that. They just woke up one morning and said, you know what? I'm going to try my luck. I'm out of here. So we don't even know. Sometimes when we think about this, we think, well, maybe, why did our people stay in this? Well, some stayed, a lot of them left. Phil, a very likely Negro man named Phil, about 20 years of age, of a yellow complexion, 9 inches high, proportionally made. He is a native of Africa, but speaks broken English, having been for some years in the West Indies, and has lost 2 joints off 2 of his fingers of his right hand. Had on, when he went away, an Osnabrück shirt, an old Virginia cloth waistcoat with a new Negro cotton jacket over it, and a pair of old check trousers, and he has been used to the sea. He will probably endeavor to get on board some ship and make his escape from out of the colony. So you can read that, you can understand that. Now, ultimately, whether you read 100 of these or 1,000 of them, ultimately what you see is the wisdom, the genius, and the courage of black people to say, I'm resisting. We don't have arms, but we do have our intelligence. And we know how to read the stars. Just like we have actually a young lady in here, Carmela Harris, who's writing her dissertation on Harriet Tubman. She's sitting back there, and there she is. And how you doing? And she's writing and telling us about Harriet's genius, because it took genius to do what she did. It took a knowledge of the sky. You had to watch. This is a history of Africans watching the stars, figuring out what appears when, and what is the best time to do what you need to do. So when we sang all my troubles will soon be over with, we knew that there was a war. The war was coming. The war with slavery, the war over slavery. The Europeans try to call it, they call it all kinds of things. They say, well, this was the Civil War. Oh, wait a minute. This is not a Civil War. We know what this war was all about. Sometimes they say this is the Union versus the Confederacy. Oh, yeah. No. This was a war about whether or not African people should be held in bondage in perpetuity. That's what this war was about. And those that we claim are the Union, which was led by Abraham Lincoln, they said, no, you can't have a nation that's divided, where you're going to have some people free and some people enslaved. You can't do that. I mean, this nation will never be a real nation. So there's a war. And this war was actually started by the people in the South. South Carolina started the war at Fort Sumter. So they were the first ones to shoot, you see. And so then the war happens. And as the war happens and it wears on, ultimately 2 generals defined the end of the war. And that was General Grant, Ulysses Grant, and General Robert Lee. And this is the interesting thing. Many people in the South, and I'm one of them, had, for some reason, in our families, many people with the name Lee in our names. Did you not know that? There are all kinds of black people who are named Arthur Lee, Robert Lee, Mamie Lee, Mary Lee. It is because the white people influenced us with their notion that Robert Lee was the greatest general of the war. That's why black people got those names. If you got Lee in your name, change it today. There's no need you to have a Lee in your name. It's not an African name. People walking around with these names, and they're very proud. Willie Lee. Wait a minute. You know, this was the insidious nature of segregation, racism, keeping black people from knowledge and information, you see, during these 246 years. And yet there were in 1862, Lincoln decided to let black people fight because we had hoped to fight and to be engaged in this process. And the colored troops in Camp William Penn. How many people heard of Camp William Penn? A few of you. Well, you can go to it. It's only 4 miles from here, probably. In Maat. You heard of Maat. That's right outside. Go to Cheltenham. Right across Cheltenham is Maat. That's where the federal government trained the first African troops to fight in the Civil War. Right here in Philadelphia. That's it. And it was named, the town, Maat, was named for Lucretia Mott, who was an abolitionist, you see. So the first official authorization to employ African Americans in federal service was the Second Confiscation and Militia Act of 1872. It allowed Lincoln to receive into military service persons of African descent and gave permission to use them for any purpose. So this was important because he did this in terms of trying to win the war. And one of the statements that Lincoln made later was that if it had not been for the black people who fought, 178,000 to be exact, 178,000 black people, men and women, fought in the Civil War. These are black people. So our freedom was not even given to us. We fought for our freedom. We answered the call of Frederick Douglass and we answered the call of Octavius Cato. We were the ones who said, when they said that we had to rise and fight against racism and segregation and discrimination and slavery in the South, we rushed to do it. In the fall of 1862, there were at least 3 Union regiments of African Americans raised in New Orleans alone. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Louisiana Native Guard. These units later became the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Infantry Corps d'Afrique, and then the 73rd, 74th, and 75th United States Colored Infantry. In late January of 1863, Governor John Andrew of Massachusetts received permission to raise a regiment of African American soldiers. This was the first regiment to be organized in the North, and 113 different regiments had African Americans in them. Black soldiers, however, were even discriminated by the people in the army. They were discriminated by the people in the army. The Union discriminated against black people. So again, this is this hierarchy, right? Black soldiers who were asked to perform no fewer duties than their white compatriots earned $7 a month, while whites earned $13 a month. This is in the North now. We ain't talking, this is in the North. You get in the Army and you're earning $7 a month and they're earning $13. This was the case from 1863 into the mid 1864. So already we're being divested of our wealth. The legacy of the United States colored troops resides in the 9th now and 10th Cavalry, as well as the 24th and 25th Infantry. These were eventually called the Buffalo Soldiers. There's more history here. I'm not going to talk about it. I just want to finish quickly and say that there's a legacy of science in philosophy and medicine and geometry and sculpture, the calendar, mathematics, and astronomy that goes back ancient times. Onesimo was an African doctor in Boston in the 18th century. He was the one who was credited with helping to control the smallpox epidemic in Boston. George Washington Carver, is by far one of the greatest inventors, scientific inventors in the history of this country. He did over 300 different patents with peanuts and sweet potatoes. This is Mr. Carver at Tuskegee in his lab. And Emmett Chappell did 14 discoveries in chemistry. He's one of the great chemists of all time. And the first African scientist was Benjamin Banneker, who invented one of the first clocks in North America, became the surveyor. I said one of the surveyors because the other surveyor was Lafont. Lafont. You heard of Lafont Square in Washington? It's named for Lafont because Thomas Jefferson and others had asked Lafont to lay out this new city because the capital of America was Philadelphia. But they want to lay out a new city that would be a new capital that would be between the southern colonies and the northern colonies. And so Lafont started the process. And then there was a dispute between Lafont and Jefferson. Lafont fell ill, and they relied on a black man. His name was Benjamin Banneker. He was a Senegalese. In fact, there's a big monument to him in Maryland. You can go to see Benjamin Banneker's monument. But Benjamin Banneker, who had invented the first clock, had written to Thomas Jefferson, and then he was asked to finish, to complete the laying out of the design of Washington, D.C. That's why when I used to teach at Howard University, we used to call it Banneker City, because it was Banneker City. It was Banneker who finished the project of Washington, D.C. And we sometimes forget that there are thousands of African engineers and scientists in this country. Janet Bastian invented a word program for court proceedings that is still in use. Sharon Haney is one of DuPont, chemical country's most outstanding inventor. And Edward Tonstel, I was able to see him in person, was one of the senior robotic experts for the Mars project. He came to Philadelphia and did a program, but he was a guy who built the thing that moves around or go over the territory. That's him, Tonstel. Yes, the rover. That's right, the rover. That's him. And then early on, there was Daniel Hale Williams, who was the first surgeon to operate on the heart. And we studied him when I was in high school. We would learn about Daniel Hale Williams. And we learned about another one, a scientist, J. Ernest Wilkins. There were 15 black people who were involved, and I'm not sure this is such a great credit, but they were scientists, but 15 of them were involved. You saw the movie Oppenheimer? There were 15 black physicists who worked on that project. But they don't come in, you don't see them in the movie. You see, 15. And one of them had started when he was only 19. PhD from University of Chicago, J. Ernest Wilkins. J. Ernest Wilkins. And when they moved the project from Chicago to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they were doing this nuclear thing, he couldn't go because of segregation. And he went away, went on, I think, to teach at Howard or somewhere else. But J. Ernest Wilkins, one of the most brilliant scientists, African-American scientist, an electrical inventor, Granville T. Woods, invented the electrical system to prevent train collisions. You see, he did many other things. He was an electrical genius. His work is now absorbed into all electricity. And then, of course, Garrett Morgan, who invented the gas mask. This was done because after World War I, where so many people died because of gas, poison gas, he was one of the ones who did that. And then there was Louis Latimer, brilliant genius did the telephone and electricity. And in fact, it is said that Edison really took some of his ideas from Latimer. And then Percy Julian, you may not have heard of him, but this was the guy who invented cortisone. And this was one of the great contributions to reducing pain in America. He was a major scientist, Percy Julian. So sometimes we, as I say, we forget these people. And Valerie Thomas, who in 1980 created an illusion transmitter for image processing. This had a lot to do with the space program. And then the electrodynamic expert, Meredith Gourdine, who had 40 patents to his name, one of the most brilliant scientists. And then this is a local boy, James Edward West from New Jersey, who Temple University just about 10 years ago gave an honorary doctorate to. James Edward West, if you pick up your telephone, your cell phone, your mobile phone, you're picking up James Edward West. He was the inventor of the microphone that's in every phone, every cell phone. That process was invented by the great scientists and physicists who won an award for National Medal of Technology, James Edward West. I'm going to stop here and just let you know that this is the platform for this series that I will be doing from time to time on African American history. And I'll just say thank you very much. And if there are any questions or comments, I'll definitely. Yes. Okay, there are questions. Okay. Yeah, Dr. Ade, thank you so much. Dr. Ade is here, and Dr. Ade, you may see him. He comes in and out, but he's one of the most brilliant young men I know, and is really the associate director of this institute. So it's Dr. Ade. Dr. Jabali, thanks. All right, question.
Yes, one of the things I really noted when you were talking about the enslaved Africans who made their escape was as they described them, they described each one with some kind of horrible scars and treatment. Even the woman, the burns on her breast, and the broken bones in the hands and the toe. Each one had been so tortured. It wasn't one description, and that to them was just description of the person.
Yes.
So it shows that the unbelievable level of inhumanity.
It was total. It was total. The whole system was like that, and the whole system felt like if you could punish a black person for anything or for nothing, you had the right to bury a person in the earth up to their neck and to put honey on their heads and let bees come and sting them. You had that right. You had the right to wire the jaws of African people closed and shut with wire so that if they worked in the sugarcane fields, they would not be able to chew any sugarcane. You had the right to. We had no rights, actually. There were no rights. I mean, when you are enslaved as chattel means that you are property. That means that whatever the slave master wanted with you, he could do, because you're his property. You just like a dog or a horse. You like a plow. There's no, you're not a human. In the mentality, and this is why we write. This is why we wrote the book Being Human Being, because the European sees the African. This is true with the police. They see the African as less than. And if you see people as less than in any circumstances in the world, you treat them that way. You see, So the scars on the backs of African people, the scars on their breasts, there were even genital scars. All these things white people did to debase human beings. And when they describe people, and they didn't know that they were leaving a record for history, they just want to get their slave back. I want to get her back or get him back. And then when you got him back, you're going to whip him again. You know what I'm saying? If I'm going to really put a scar on him, that kind of thing. But it was a very brutal system.
No sense of humanity that at all it was just a part of the description to them of the pain.
Absolutely.
But they wouldn't be able to describe a cow that way because they wouldn't have beat their cow.
That's exactly right. They wouldn't beat their dogs like that.
Wow.
Excellent. Hotep, brother.
These are the kinds of images that if our people could get one, exposure, and two, repetitions of exposure of information like this, it would transform our being. I don't have any illusions about mainstream media, so I purposely did not go to see the feature film that they had on Harriet, but Molefi Asante informed us that he went. Mm-hmm. And they had the audacity to say that this woman brought back 30 people. Mm-hmm. 30 people, when you Google it and it comes up 300. And so what you had to do, they watered down her image because I guess they felt that was too powerful an image for the black mind. So I'm saying, this woman went on foot and brought back 300 people, never lost anybody. And they put the $40,000, which is equivalent to $2 million, on her head and still couldn't touch her. That's how bad she was.
That's right.
See, so
beautiful.
I'm very glad to get this kind of information.
Thank you, Brother Ransom. Thank you, Brother Ransom. I just want to say that ultimately it was 1,000 because she saved about 700 people. In addition to that 300, she saved about 700 from a plantation in South Carolina during the war itself. So she is the greatest person in African American history, if you ask me. I could think of great people, but I don't think of anyone greater than Harriet Tubman, Araminta, Minty. Is that right? Am I right? All right, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. We were, as you said, we were legally freed in 1865, but some people think that we're still enslaved.
Right.
What's your comment on that?
That's a very good point. It's a very good point. Well, there are a couple of points on that. One is that in 1865, when African people gained freedom, we have to understand that freedom was our cry. It had never been the cry of the European in America. There were abolitionists who cried for freedom for us, but the European was interested in what they used to call liberty. That's a different task. You see, liberty, and this is when you go back to the Revolutionary War in America, the war between Britain and the United States. They were fighting for liberty. They were fighting for individuals to be able to, to decide what taxes they were going to pay, and it was a whole different individualistic thing. But the African people, because of bondage, our only cry was for freedom. Because we knew that with freedom, we could do a lot more than we could under bondage. And that freedom, therefore, is the great contribution of the African Americans to everybody else who wants to be free in America. We gave that. I say sometimes to my Mexican American friends, we were the ones who fought for freedom. We fought for it. We put our lives on the line. We were the ones who fought for justice in America during segregation. So now you go to the University of Georgia, where I couldn't go when I was a young person. I had to go to the University of California. I couldn't go to the University of Georgia. I was born in Georgia. But I couldn't go to the University of Georgia. But now you go to the University of Georgia in Athens, they got Indians and Chinese and everybody, right? Because black people fought for that. So I think that, yeah, we have a measure of freedom. We're no longer a chattel, doctor. We're no longer a chattel, but we are not yet liberated in our minds. All right, thank you. All right, one more. Yes, Sister Alexander.
Everyone, last week I was up in Toronto, Canada. And of course, one of our trips were to the Harriet Tubman Museum and the church. I can't think of the name of it this minute. And in there, we saw a lot of different things on the wall that took place. And the person that gave us the lecture was just awesome. And they brought up that movie, Harriet. And like the gentleman here said, what the movies portrayed was not the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And also, they still have the railroad that she crossed. They kept that as a momentum to her, and also it's a monument.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just quite interesting of what we heard and what we saw, and the truth that really, really happened there. From Harriet coming so many different times in and out, the amount of people that Dr. Asante just mentioned is the truth. The few people that they mentioned, of course, we know it isn't the truth. So if you ever get a chance to go to Canada, go to Montreal, go to
Toronto and St.
Toronto.
Catharines.
St. Catharines, exactly. That church is still open. They have service on Sunday. Right now, they only have 7 members. 7 members. And whatever kind of support we can send, it would be very well welcome and what have you.
Beautiful.
So next time I come back, I'll think of some other little things. But I did take some pictures, but it's awesome
Thank
to
you.
have lived that history.
Yes, that's a wonderful thing, Ms. Alexander. I was also at that church in St. Catharines, and one of the reasons that Harriet went there too was she had a meeting with John Brown, and this was they were out of the United States, and there was a very, very bad situation that you had to get to Canada because the fugitive slave law had been passed in America, where even if you escaped and you were in Pennsylvania or Ohio, the slave catchers could go and get you and bring you back to bondage. So that's why people said they would go running to Canada. And Ontario was the base for a lot of Africans landing there, such as Mary Shad, for example, the journalist, and as well as Harriet was there for a while. And then they come back. So that's a wonderful thing. Thank you so much for that. Are there any questions? No?
The questions online seem to be around
The same.
how do we get education to push some of the achievements.
Okay. So thank you very much for the online people. How do we get education for this? Well, again, we have to fight for it. You have to fight for it. You go into the school boards and fight for it. People are fighting for it here in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. They're fighting for their children to be taught the information that is based on our history and our culture as well. I mean, you can't just erase a whole people, but that's what this society is seeking to do. There's erasure. I was telling somebody about Diane Nash the other day, the lady who led the student movement in Nashville, Tennessee, in the late 1950s, early 1960s that I marched in. She was one of the people that, in fact, helped to bring me to consciousness because I was a high school student, and Diane Nash was a student at Fisk, and she led a citywide movement of college and high school students to fight against the Ritz Theater Company and a hamburger company and all these things, and we marched the streets of Nashville. That's one of the ways that I began to be radicalized, by understanding what was going on, you see. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Brother Kareem. I want to thank all of you for coming. And we say, as we always do, we call upon our ancestors, far and near, the mother of our mothers, the father of our fathers, to render mercy and to bear witness for the liberation and the victory of all oppressed people. Forever it is done. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Thank you very much.